I'm Ed Clarke, and today I'm looking at vibrato, both in technique and also the way you apply it to your playing. Now, I'd like to thank Jimmy for suggesting this video. If you have any ideas of things you'd like me to cover, just put them down in the comments and I'll see what I can do. Now, vibrato is an incredibly personal thing. It's not a case of good and bad. Every player has their own style, and I think it is a big part of what makes every player sound like that individual. That means that it's also giving a very different technique for everyone. So the thing I'm going to teach you today is sort of a starting point, and you guys can, in your own time, figure out what works best for you. So there are some famous examples of people that are going to break the rule that I'm going to suggest today, but that's fine. What I tend to recommend with this is that you learn the proper technique and then work on it to find what works for you. As long as it's comfortable, isn't causing you discomfort or pain, and it sounds the way you want, that's what matters. So by the famous examples, the one that's popping into my head immediately is Eric Clapton, who famously takes his entire hand off the fretboard apart from the finger that's doing the vibrato. Quite an extreme way of doing it, but it seems to work for him. Now, I should imagine that people like Clapton came up with their method of vibrato through a lot of trial and error and experimentation to get what they wanted. So what I'm going to suggest here is where I would start. So what you want to do is think of this part of your hand as it sits on the fretboard around the back as like a fulcrum, something to pivot around. So just like bending, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking you push with your fingers, and it's that action that bends a note or does vibrato. That doesn't tend to sound very controlled, so what is easier is to use your whole wrist to pivot to make the vibrato. So instead of holding your hand still and trying to use your fingers to do the motion, instead keep your fingers still and rotate your wrist a little bit. Now, of course, that works on any finger. Now, you can apply the same principle when you're using vibrato on a bend, like this. Fingers stay relatively still and your wrist does the motion. Before I get on to the next part of the video, I just wanted to remind you guys that when I reach 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to be giving away this signed fuzz pedal that was used on the recording of the last Brave Rival album. So if you like gear, lessons, and other guitar-related videos, make sure you subscribe to be in with a chance of winning. Okay, so inconsistency. Now, this is something that occurred to me when I was putting together this video, and I realized that one of my favorite things to do with vibrato, and something that I think makes it sound really, really natural, is to have it vary. Now, that doesn't mean completely random, but if you just put the same amount of vibrato throughout an entire note, it tends to sound quite forced. If, however, you start the note with no vibrato, and then gradually bring in the vibrato, you can get some quite expressive lines out of it. So what you notice there is that I started some of those notes with no vibrato and gradually brought it in so the vibrato sped up. This is something that requires quite a lot of experimentation to kind of find where it works, because if you do it on every single note, it'll lose its effect. If you don't do it enough, you're not maximizing its effect. So it's kind of something that you need to work on and really find what works for you. Okay, knowing when not to use vibrato. Now, this is something, again, along with the previous point, I think can really add expression to playing. If you use the same amount of vibrato throughout a note, it can take away from the expression, like I said just a moment ago. But also, if you use the same approach to vibrato on every note, you end up with the same problem. So you'll notice that some players will use no vibrato on certain notes, and this is just a feel thing. There's no sort of right or wrong, this is where you should and this is where you shouldn't. It's just knowing what to listen for and what feels right. You can also merge this with different widths of vibrato, so how much you're moving your wrist and how much you're varying the notes. That can really change the vibe of what you're playing. Some metal players commonly will use some pretty wide vibrato. Works better with higher gain, but also you'll get players that use very subtle vibrato. You can even apply a more classical technique where you move your wrist up and down the fretboard slightly instead of that kind of rocking motion. You end up with a really, really subtle vibrato. Honestly, the best bit of advice I can give to someone about approaching vibrato practice is to listen and experiment. By that I mean listen to everything you're playing and try and hear what you want it to sound like. Instead of thinking your way through it, listen and feel your way through it. So it's very easy as guitarists to get bogged down in scales and exactly which note you're playing. But don't just pick a note from the scale, listen to that note. What does that note sound like? Does it want more vibrato? Does it want less vibrato? Does it want no vibrato? All of these things can massively change your playing. It's also worth spending some time at home practicing different ways of approaching vibrato. If you've seen a player do something like Eric Clapton, which you think that's a very odd way of approaching it, give it a try. See if it works for you, see if you can incorporate it into your playing. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon to be notified of new videos. Have yourself a great day, and I'll see you next time.